Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Avangel, and today we're taking a look at the brand new aircraft from Carenado, the Piper Seminole. This is the PA-44, and it is essentially a development of the Piper Cherokee, their original single-engine aircraft, and, well, not the original, but the most numerous, let's just say, in terms of aircraft currently operating by Piper. Now, the Seminole is a twin-engine aircraft. It operates with two 180 horsepower, I believe they're Lycoming engines in this aircraft, but it is a beautiful twin, most commonly used for GA flying, some business use, and largely training. Now, it uses the Lycoming O360 engine or the O360 engine, depending on which variant we're looking at. There was a turbo variant, which this is not, but it still operates with 280-degree engine, 180 horsepower. I can speak English, I promise. Let's take a look at the aircraft in slightly more detail. So, with more recent FS 2020 aircraft, Carenado has included this, which is actually backdated to the original. Let me turn off all my electronics, which I have on by default on my yoke. Let's get those knocked off. So, of course, we have all our usual static elements: external power, tow bars, pilot and co-pilot options. Let's open some doors. And we can cold and dark, ready for taxi and ready for takeoff. So let's take a look outside. Here we are on the tarmac at Orcas Island, of course, my favourite test airport. We have all our static elements we'd normally want in the aircraft, the flags for the engine covers, ground power unit, cargo and cabin doors as nice options. Let's go back inside. The aircraft comes with 4 separate liveries, all fairly nice GA ones, all compliant with the INSIM tail number functionality, which is useful. We'll go back, we'll clear our tow bar, which was off. We had that on again. External power, static elements. Let's close the doors. And we'll leave ourselves cold and dark. But, obviously, as with all Carenado aircraft, you can operate the doors from the inside. Just not the baggage door. You can't reach that one, obviously. And not really something you'd open from the inside anyway. The storm door window is also a functionality. Usual features like the sun visors, all functional in the aircraft. Something that the default aircraft look like they should have working, but don't. It's kind of sad. But this one does. Now, this is a fully steam gauge aircraft, of course, besides the GPS unit. We're going to go ahead and get ourselves... Okay, go away so I can get this thing started up. First, look at our camera functionality here. So, default view. That's our over-the-nose view for landing, instruments, and even the fuel selectors down here, which we can select our fuel to on. Let's take a look down here at the panel, and we're going to get ourselves started up. So, battery is on. We're going to want our fuel pumps, right mag and left mag, both mags. We've got our starters here. Let's put the primer on for both. Left and right fuel pumps. And rather than using my normal system, I will start up with the rocker switches here. Left engine start. Beacon and nav lights are on, and we're not starting up for some reason there. Oh, because it's got the condition set to 0. Even though my condition was fully set in. Right engine's good. Left engine's good. Set them come up, and we'll see how things are going whilst we get the alternator and avionics all switched on. Looking good there. So, of course, this is something that's going to be great for when I, for example, get my Bravo throttle quadrant, which is fully twin compliant. I only have a single throttle set up right now, which is my Logitech or Cytec single quadrant unit. I have a second one, but it isn't set up due to space. But for example, with the Bravo quadrant, this will be ideal. You'll have all that functionality to use everything you'd want to use. Of course, normally naturally aspirated engine, it's carbureted, so you have the controls for that. All our lighting systems are down here on the panel. Overhead, you've just got vents, and you've got the cabin lighting. So it's a nice, simple aircraft. We're going to take her out for a quick spin, and we'll come back and we'll do some single-engine flying and see how she handles asymmetric flight operations, because there are not a huge amount of twin-engine aircraft in 2020 so far, so it'll be nice to play with one and see how it behaves. So, parking brakes are off. Strobes are on for movement. Let's get ourselves rolling. bit of engine to get moving. Twin 180s are pretty noisy, but you'd expect that. Essentially have two Cessna 172s strapped to the wings. Good visibility in the aircraft, so it's going to be a great touring plane. Get ourselves taxied out here to the runway. We don't bother with ATC on these demo flights for the review purposes. Texture-wise and quality-wise of the aircraft modelling and textures, exactly what I'd expect from Carenado. Great appearance, great performance so far in the sim. We are at Orcas Island, so this is kind of a static test location for me to show you performance. We've got our first notch of takeoff flaps in, and we're going to full power. So we're going to get the aircraft rolling down the runway here. Little back on the stick, and she eases off the runway nicely. Oh, little sensitive on the pitch. Gears coming up. And flaps coming up. We'll ease back on the throttles. She'll cruise at about 160 knots for about 950 nautical miles. So not quite the endurance you'd perhaps look for in a touring twin, but certainly not bad at all. Aircraft's roll is nice. We'll bank around here to the east. Towards the mountains off there inland. Visibility is very Piper-like, so you've got the large pillars in the way. The two engines do make a bit of visibility difference on the wings, of course, if you're used to flying singles. But the aircraft flies incredibly timidly, very stable. This is most commonly used as a trainer for complex twin-engine operations, and it behaves like a trainer. It's gentle and forgiving. We're going to do a power-off stall. And it's bitching at me with the zero throttle there. We'll nose up till she stalls. Gentle drop of the nose, exactly as expected. We'll recover some airspeed and level flight, and we'll go for a power on stall. This should be a much more violent affair. Keep an eye on the Lindbergh reference, or at least what we can see of it. Aircraft's trying to roll as we stall. And recover out of it. Nicely done. Okay, so for test's sake, we're going to go and kill our, let's say, the right engine, shall we? Let's... Oh, hello. That's a lot of asymmetric roll. Let's cut this. There we go, visibility's back. So you have to give this quite a bit of rudder to maintain stability here. Engine is still windmilling. We'll feather that. So I'm going to still operate to blue line here for my existing engine. And because I'm on a single quadrant, it's not going to let me do it properly there. I don't believe I actually have feather controls for individual engines here. I'm just going to hope that stays to where it is. It's not going to, is it? Because of the positioning. I will try and encourage it back. And we are in basically a constant bank right now. I'm just going to allow the aircraft to come round. As one engine is basically windmilling right now, so it's in its most difficult state, and we are kind of running slow here. I've got almost full control wheel over to try and maintain my heading and give it a little bit of rudder into the engine. We'll throttle back here to try and reduce the asymmetric thrust level. And we're going to try and bring it back into the runway on one engine. This should be a spicier affair than I'm used to, but once we get on final, it should be easier. We'll throttle back and we'll lose a lot of that asymmetric thrust. I've not really done a lot of single engine ops in 2020 yet. It's always, of course, more of a challenge than running with two engines because of the asymmetric nature of thrust when you have engines out on the wings. Much more different to having two on the body, for example, like large jets that operate in that sort of fashion. But the aircraft at about 3/4 throttle right now is operating relatively stable. I've got a bit of left rudder in here just to control my actual heading. And a little bit of left aileron. So there's our runway heading. We'll treat this like an emergency landing, and we'll bring her back in as expected. The aircraft's definitely a handful like this. It's not bad. It could be worse. Of course, they're only 180 horsepower engines, so it's not a significant amount of asymmetric thrust. For example, something like a 1900 or a King Air with the PT6s, those things are ridiculous when it comes to the thrust provided by those turboprop engines. So we are losing altitude here. We're trying to maintain our speed still. I don't want to use too much power, but I'm going to give it a bit more just to help keep us above blue line. Blue line is our, of course, single engine maneuvering speed that we want to maintain. We're a little bit low here, which is a problem. I'm going to try and roll the aircraft around here onto it. It's a good engine. Be very careful not to stall the aircraft when you're working with an asymmetric thrust turning into the engine. Bringing it around on the heading now. Should become nice and docile and placid once they're throttled back, because then we'll be operating on the same thrust essentially. So let's pop the gear down. That does change the handling slightly. Okay. Little bit of a stall. Give it a bit of that. We have to throttle up here. Try and roll ourselves round onto runway heading. We're very low. Very close to stall point. Okay, runway heading. Come on, behave yourself. Maintaining altitude is quite hard here. We're at full throttle. I'm going to have to bring the flaps up. This is not good. And we're going down. Gear up. Can I clear the trees before we stall into the water? I don't think we will. I'm holding this on the stall horn as long as it will go. And we're in the water. Okay, so that's a lot of noise. Go away, all of you. Warning sounds. So, she's definitely interesting, as we appear to be progressively sinking. That's cool. Okay, this is a nice feature of 2020 I had not really experienced before, but we are in fact in the water. I think the thrust is a little bit too significant in this. Seeing as this is an aircraft you do train, I've never flown a Seminole in real life. I will have to get expert opinion from people who've flown one in the comments, but from what I've seen, the Seminole should be a relatively placid aircraft in single engine operations. This would not maintain altitude in single engine, and that could be a Flight Sim 2020 quirk, but it is most decidedly come on, there we go. Most decidedly not what I would have expected from the aircraft to behave this way in terms of its performance. I actually expected far better. So this is a quirk, perhaps. It really does not want to maintain altitude. But single engine out at low altitude is always going to be tricky, and always going to be a very difficult operation for the pilots. I could not make it back to the runway from that distance, so little exaggerated perhaps in terms of the lack of thrust provided by an individual engine compared to the amount of yaw imparted. Considering they are relatively close together, it shouldn't be this dramatic. Overall, it's a really placid aircraft to fly with two engines. I hope you've got altitude when you've only got one. You're going to need it. So rather than the water, we're now actually about to turn downwind for landing here at Orcas Island for a normal landing with two engines, rather than this whole shenanigans of one engines and floating. Although we did discover you actually can sail it when you've dunked it in the water using a rudder. Nice wind physics. Either way, we're turning downwind here for a landing on 1.6, and we're going to make a normal approach and landing in the pattern. So little bit high up here actually. We'll just make sure we're at the right altitude for our pattern. A little bit of a late downwind turn as well, but we'll make a normal pattern approach and landing here for 1.6 Orcas Island. Aircraft is trimmed nice and neutral here for pattern. A little bit nose low. We'll let it settle a little bit on our approach down. So the airport sub down there to our left wing. Of course, patterns are going to be a little trickier in a twin because you have, of course, to contend with the engine in the way. So you're often looking off the back of the wing there. So we'll make our turn in a moment, as it wants me to drop my gear already, because it's bitching at me. Yes, thank you. I want to idle down to throttle here, so we'll put our car beat on whilst we're idling. The aircraft becomes incredibly heavy as you idle down. Drop a notch of flaps here. It wants to lose speed incredibly rapidly, and it's a very, very draggy aircraft, which isn't unusual considering it's got the candy bar, well, not the candy bar, the canted wing style of later Pipers, but incredibly draggy. This probably could contribute to why it's so poor on single engine performance, and it could be a sim flight modeling issue there. But our gear is confirmed down. We're turning base now for final. Let the aircraft sink down here. Little bit of rudder to keep ourselves coordinated. Becoming incredibly heavy on the controls here. It's very pitch sensitive, I've noticed. But we have got the T-tail on this aircraft, like the arrows, of course, which does make pitch a bit more sensitive when, or spongy is the correct word, actually, and a little bit jerkier at times, because it's out of the direct prop wash. So we'll make our turn to final. A gentle roll onto final here. Keep an eye on our airspeed. Let's give it another notch of flaps. Yeah, pitch is a lot more sensitive in this aircraft perhaps than I would have expected, but should be a relatively easy and gentle roll in here. Runway's just out of sight behind the A-post. Here she comes. Kind of an aggressive pattern, but we'll go for it. Bring the aircraft down, nice and gentle. Everything is configured for landing, as it really wants to sink. I think the drag coefficient is a little high. That's been a bit of an off factor in some aircraft in the sim by default, where some aircraft are extremely draggy and some are incredibly slippery. This one definitely feels way more draggy than it probably should. Okay, bring her in nicely and we'll flare. Touchdown just right at the center line there. Rollout is... I'm going to allow it to roll out naturally here because I want to see exactly how draggy it really thinks it is. And I'm not braking at all here. And we're decelerating pretty rapidly. Now there's the end of the runway. We do want to start braking here. So... no braking, just gentle application towards the end of the runway. And close to a real stop here. So very draggy, I think, is probably the best definition I can bring from it. As we'll taxi her back to the apron now, where we started from. But I've got to say, the Seminole's nice. Little too draggy. Nervous when it comes to single engine operations. I'd hate to lose one in the field in actual flight conditions, because with how draggy this thing is, even on twin engine power off, I would hate to have to lose one and try and find an airfield. So that's my only criticism, really. Everything else is absolutely normal Carenado standard. Hopefully you enjoyed the review, including the dunking. Thanks for watching. Bye.